Welcome, friends of the Greasy Shop Rag. Today we're going to take a look at a Husqvarna chainsaw. We're going to put a new brake band in this saw. This procedure is typical for a lot of Husky models. I think this particular one is a 450 Rancher with a 440, 435. A few other models in between. They're all very similar type of repair. So to get into this, we're going to take off this gray plastic cover, and underneath here is the spring that actuates the brake. The brake is that silver band that you see wrapped around in a circular shape there. Now careful when you take this cover off, because that spring is under there and under tension, and you'll see we're going to release the pressure on that in just a minute. So when I'm releasing the pressure on these things, I like to put a rag over the top of the spring. And this is called the knee joint. We just popped it back. And now there's less pressure on the spring. But there's still pressure there, so I always keep that rag over the top of it. So as we go through this, we're going to clean all the parts because we want to put it back together clean. There's a little circlip holding this knee joint in place on a post. We just remove the clip there. It lays on a bench. Note where it's laying on the bench. And now we have all the guts out of the cover as far as the brake actuation mechanism. Here's the band itself that's broken. And this band on a Husky is usually going to have a pin on one end where it's locked into the cover. Sometimes that can be a pain in the butt to remove that pin out of the end there. They get pressed in and sometimes they lock in there a little bit. So here's our new band that we're putting in. And again, we're going to clean some debris out of the way. And there's a single screw that holds that band to the knee joint. And we're removing that screw now. And part of the band, because it's broken, is still attached to the knee joint. This little part right here, that's actually part of the brake band. And we'll just slip the knee joint into the new brake band. Install the single screw that holds it. That was simple enough. Now we're going to lay the knee joint in place in the cover. And we're going to use grease on here. Brake band is a safety device, so you want to make sure that it's going to work when you need it. That's why we use the grease, so it doesn't seize up on us. Now where did that clip go? Well, if you were paying attention, one of those times when I blasted that cover with air to clean it, I actually blew that clip. Luckily it only went, a foot away. But I have to wonder how many times I've lost parts that I actually blew right off the end of the workbench. I'm having a heck of a time finding that thing. There we go. Alright, so the E-clip goes back on. There we go. More grease. And now we have to install our spring. This isn't that big a deal. I mean, some saws it's worse. But I do the same thing. I just hold the spring down. And I use a scrunch here with a tapered end on it. Put a rag over the spring in case it goes flying. Or it wants to go flying. And we just compress the spring until we get it at the end of the cover there. And push it down. That still could go flying out, so you got to be a little bit careful here. more grease. And until we get a couple screws in here, we're not really considering it safe yet. Don't get carried away tightening these things down. And we got our 4 screws in place. Now the brake needs to be unlocked. You know, that brake clamps down on the clutch drum, so you can't push the brake cover over the clutch drum until you release the brake. And when you're releasing the brake here, when it's off the saw, you have to check that that brake band isn't sitting in front of those little perches that support it. Like it was sitting under that perch, so the actual diameter of the band was smaller than it needed to be. So we had to just kind of push it up onto that perch into its home. So the actual brake band job is done. I think this saw is going out on rent, and I had to look it over before we sent it out. And that bar just looks terrible. So we're checking it for straightness first. It's got a little arc in it. That's no good. We're going to check the groove. It's a 50 gauge bar, but I'm able to drop the 58 gauge tool into that groove. And then the nose sprocket, that bearing shot. You can see how burnt it is up there too. Someone probably ran that without any oil. So because it's a rental saw, we just grab a used bar. And the nose bearing on that one looks good. The straightness is good. This is a 50 gauge bar. And as long as I can't drop the 58 gauge tool into the groove, then I'm happy. Now I just like to clean this chain guide plate off before I put the thing together. There's a big hunk of wood in between there. Then oil can't decently feed from the crankcase to the bar. It may just drip right at the end of the saw there instead of getting pushed into the groove of the bar and having the chain lubricated. So because we're putting a new chain on, which isn't stretched, that means our tensioner is going to be out of adjustment. So we have to release, back off the screw on the tensioner, get the chain on the bar, slide the brake band over the studs and over the drum. Look at them go. Always roll the chain. Sometimes just the act of rolling the chain sets the chain in the spur drive and you have to retension it. Then we're going to grease the nose sprocket. If you got one hole, you usually have one on each side. Then we'll just fire this thing up and see if the brake works. So that's all I'm going to have for you on the Husqvarna chain brake repair. Thanks for watching. Later.